Okay, hello everyone to our session multi-developer scenario in analysis services with Tabular Editor, Source Tree and BITBUCKET. We are very happy to present our session here at the New Stars of Data conference. We are my lovely colleague Kathrin and me, Steffen Genz. I visited the DataGrillen conference in Lingen in 2019 and thought, okay, in 2020, I will enter the New Stars of Data arena, but that was in fact not the case. So this year I will do this straight from my kitchen, in the home office, obviously. So, who we are. We work for Exro. It's a wholesaler for office supplies in Hamburg. And if you sell office supplies, you wouldn't expect this, but the prices go up and down like a stock market. So we analyze a large amount of data for our sales, for our purchase, or for our logistic department. And for that reason, we use Power BI and the Tabular Editor 3 a lot. So what should you be able to take with you from our presentation? So I worked alone on my analysis services data model for years. And at the end, it was big and cluttered with a lot of unused measures, columns, and so on. So when Kathrin entered the company, we built up a completely new data model. And at this point, you should consider the following questions for yourself. Why is an aligned workflow so important? Why is a clean data model so important? Why should you have best practice rules? And how can both work simultaneously on one data model? And we decided for ourselves, we need similar workflows and the same work rules. It feels like one signature if you see our data model. And we also want to have a sustainable data model. We have a lot of measures that depends on each other. And at last, we have a lot of user feedback. So we knew that the new data model would also grow fast in size. Okay, now we want to show you our tool set. We mostly use Atlassian software in our company for all our developers. So we want to show our solution based on that. Jira is our ticket system. BITBUCKET is our JIT repository. Source Tree is our JIT client. And at last, Tabular Editor 3. And if you haven't seen Tabular Editor 3 right now, Kathrin will now show you some really, really cool stuff. And we see us later to the second part of our session. Bye-bye.
Exactly. Thank you very much, Steffen.
You're welcome.
All right. It's a pleasure to be here today. Hi, everyone. And as Steffen already mentioned, as Tabular Editor is one of our tools that we use in our tool set, I would now like to give you a quick overview. So for those of you who might not know the Tabular Editor yet, Tabular Editor is a tool to edit and manage the expressions of measures, calculated columns, calculated tables. You can create display folders and manage perspectives or even translations. What you can do is that you can edit a BIM file without accessing to any data. So you have an offline capability, which makes changes very quick to be applied to the BIM file. And it enables you to load huge model metadata sets. So you can load huge models with hundreds of tables and thousands of measures and apply those changes instantly. The Tabular Editor provides an intuitive hierarchical view of every object in your tabular model. And what is really useful is that you can directly connect to your Power BI file. So Power BI Desktop automatically refreshes your visuals and saves or shows the field list, the refreshed field list whenever you save your changes back in Tabular Editor. Or you can also work offline by opening a BIM file and saving your changes back to the file, or deploying it to your model to a tabular server, which is what we do most of the time. Also, Tabular Editor lets you easily clone your measures, columns, or even entire tables. And you can multi-select and drag and drop objects between display folders, between tables, or even across whole models. Another great feature of Tabular Editor is the best practice analyzer, which is a tool that lets you define global or model-specific rules using a simple expression language. And there are some great new features in Tabular Editor 3, which I would like to show you in a second. Those are INTELLISENSE, the diagram view, and DAX scripting. This is just a small selection of all the new features there are, but those are the ones that we found are most interesting for you today. At the moment, Tabular Editor 3 is only available as a beta version, but it will hopefully be soon published and be there for everyone. Tabular Editor 3 has a new customizable user interface in the look of Visual Studio. So, for example, For example, if you're not familiar with Tabular Editor yet, you might feel very familiar because it looks like Visual Studio. Now I would like to show you the new features in Tabular Editor in detail. So first of all, INTELLISENSE, which is Tabular Editor now includes index expression editor, INTELLISENSE, and autocomplete. So whenever you start typing your code, you will see suggestions for different formulas and columns or measures or even tables included in your model. So as you can see here, when I start typing on this picture, all those different formulas or my tables are being suggested. And this is a very supportive feature and makes it much easier to write your code, especially when you're new to DAX. And it is basically also included in Power BI Desktop, but wasn't in Tabular Editor 2. So this is definitely one of the features we have missed in Tabular Editor 3 and is now included in Tabular Editor 2 and is now included in Tabular Editor 3. The next great feature is the diagram view. The diagram view enables you to add tables, certain tables that you can select to this view, and you can look at the relationships and dependencies of only those tables that you have selected. So instead of looking at your whole data model, as you can do in Power BI Desktop, which can be quite overwhelming if you have a large amount of tables in the model, you can select specific tables which are of your interest and look at them in detail. So making it much easier and to see specific relationships or dependencies you were looking for. And the last new great feature is the DAX scripting. DAX scripting enables you to debug and edit many expressions and properties at the same time. So as you can see, for example, I can put all my expressions and measures for my sales table into one single DAX script and edit those measures and the properties. And it gives you a very good overview and is so much more effective than going into every single measure and editing it. So you can change your code in bulk and save it back to your model. As you now know, all the features of Tabular Editor, which we use to work on our model on a daily basis, I would now like to show you our top 10 best practice rules in order to keep our data model nice and clean. And they also help us very much when co-developing on one data model. So the first best practice rule would be to use folders and measures for filters, folders for measures and filters, and hide all unused columns. So by creating a display folder for measures and another display folder for filters, you improve the readability of your data model by far. You can separate your measures and filters by putting them into different folders. For example, what we also do is if we have a lot of measures on one single table, for example, the invoices table, we separate them into different folders, again, sorted by their structure, by their content. So you get a much better overview of the structure and of your model. It also supports you by keeping track of the structure in the backend, and your model metadata set and also simplifies the usage in the front end for your power users. What we also do is that we hide all unused columns to keep the model very neat and small, and only columns that are really used in the front end should also be displayed in Power BI. Then we have some certain columns that we only use to build relationships. Those columns are also hidden and additionally put into a folder for those hash values. And by following all those rules, it really helps you to concentrate on the important things. So let's have a look at what this looks like in Tabular Editor. So for example, let's say we have a customer table and we have a folder for all the filters we use. And we have the hash value folder and we have hidden all unused columns. If we jump into the sales table, we have some measures there. So we have a folder for the measures where we put all those into. And let's say you want to hide this column, you would right-click it and press Make Invisible. So if you want to show the column again in the model, you would right-click on it again and select Make Visible. Our second rule would be to give measures a prefix. So by giving your measures a prefix like the hashtag, the euro sign, or the dollar sign, or the percentage, you allow your user or yourself even to easily identify by the name of a measure what value to expect. So just by looking at it, you would know if you see a hashtag, this would be a count. By looking at the euro sign or the dollar sign, depending on where you come from, you would instantly know that this measure would display a monetary value like a sales amount or margin, and the percentage for percentages, of course. In our data model, this would look like this. So we have our measures, we use a hashtag for a distinct count, for the count of customers, the same goes for the count of products. If we look at the sales amount, we have a dollar sign in front of it. And for the percentage of sales, we would divide the amount of sales by, for example, the amount of sales of all statuses. So you can easily identify what value to expect just by looking at the prefix and avoid mistakes directly there. A really great feature that is included in Tabular Editor 3 is the Show CALLTIP feature. The Show CALLTIP is very helpful when writing your DAX code. So whenever you select your DAX formula, the CALLTIP will show up, or type your DAX formula, the CALLTIP will show up, and it shows you directly what the formula does and how the syntax works. And then another great feature is the link to DAX.GUIDE. So if you don't know a certain DAX function yet, the link to DAX.GUIDE is a link to the website by our favorite Italians. And it is a really neat trick and brings you all the information about the measure you need to know. So let's see in a demo how this works. For example, I would want to write a SUMX. I would start typing. The INTELLISENSE would now show me all the different codes there are. So I would say SUMX, would see the syntax and see that it is an iterator, what the formula does. Let's say I would want to write a calculate. Again, see the syntax and see that it is a context transition. So if I now am unsure what the calculate does and how it works, I could press the calculate documentation button after selecting the formula and would then jump onto the website DAX.GUIDE. There I can see the syntax again in detail with some more information, see which values are returned, have some remarks on the formula with some special tips and some related functions. So if I'm unsure about my formula, I can always read about it in detail on the website. And this is not only a great tool for beginners, but it's also always helpful to improve your knowledge of DAX. The next great feature, and our best practice number 4, is to use the DAX formatter. So by formatting your DAX code, on the one hand, of course, it helps you to read your code. On the other hand, of course, it is extremely helpful when troubleshooting. So for example, you forgot a parenthesis somewhere. If you format your code, it is way easier to find the place where you missed it in comparison to when you don't format it. So, but what if you are, for example, too lazy to properly format your code, or if you just don't know how to do it? So then the DAX formatter would be the go-to tool for you. By pressing one single button in Tabular Editor, your code is automatically being formatted and instantly so much easier to read and understand. So let's have a look at an example of the DAX formatter and how it works. So let's say I wrote a measure, including a variable, and then my return statement is the nested if statement. By just writing it like this, it is quite hard to read and to understand what it really does. So I would press the Format DAX button, and instantly it is formatted in the long line format. So now it is already so much easier to read and understand. But if I want to go in depth, I could also select the short line, and then my formula would be broken down by every single measure. Now I'm also able to expand and collapse every single piece of my code. And I'm instantly able to see what I actually wrote and how every single formula depends on the others. So the if statement is so much easier to read now than it was before. Our next best practice is to write description for users. So what we do is we add a description for every single measure we write, clarifying what values to expect. So most of the time, you have developers in your company working on the data model, writing the measures and building the model. And then on the other hand, you have power users using your data model to build their reports. But of course, those users don't know what is behind the measure you have written. And this makes it very important to clarify what values to expect. And of course, it's especially important when you use calculate and modify the context. So unless you clearly state what your filter condition is, the user won't know what values to expect and will get unexpected results, which will lead to mistakes. So by adding a description, you can save yourself a lot of questions and those mistakes. So what does it look like in the tabular editor? Let's say I write a measure for large sales. The user wouldn't know what large sales are. So I have to put in the description box what it is. So it is the sales amount of sales with value larger than $10,000. But what would it look like in Power BI? So if you save it back to the file, deploy it, or save it directly to the Power BI file, the Power user would now see your measure, and right underneath the title of the measure, he could see your description you put in the box. So he would now know that the large sales are only sales larger than $10,000 and will not make any mistakes using this measure. Similar to the principle of writing measures for your users, we also write measures for our co-authors because, of course, we are co-developing on the model. We help each other by commenting and explaining to each other why we wrote a measure the way we did. And what we also do is you've seen that we use Jira as a ticket system. We have a lot of tickets coming in, and we also include our ticket numbers into the measures to remember the certain purpose of a measure. So if we have a ticket and write a measure only because of the ticket, we would include the number to see or to remember in a couple of years' time why we wrote the measure. And remember that it has a certain purpose. So what I would do when I write a measure is, for example, it would look like this. So let's say we would want a count of the products. So I could on one hand use the listing count, but I could also write the SUMX values, which basically does the same. So I would say, write a comment for Steffen now that I've checked the performance in the performance analyzer and have seen that SUMX values perform better. So I've chosen to use SUMX values. And I've put this into the comment. And then also, I've written this measure because of a certain ticket request. So I would also write the ticket number of our Jira ticket system into the measure to remember in a couple of years' time, or even later or earlier if I forget why I wrote this specific measure. And I can always see it had a purpose. And this is the reason why I wrote it. And also Steffen, of course, then knows why I wrote the measure. All right, let me now introduce you to our measure tree. Our measure tree is basically a very metaphoric way of describing the structure in which we use and build our measures. So you will see why we call it a tree in a moment. But let me first explain the idea behind it. So in our data model, excuse me, we have two or more fact tables, for example, one on the invoice, one for the invoice table, and one for the order. So we have an invoice table and an order table as two fact tables for our sales data. And in our Power BI report, however, we want our user to be able to change between a single visualization with a switch or a filter function. So the user can change between values. So for example, we have a visualization where we put in the sales amount, the count of products, the margin, for example. And we want the user to be able to switch between those measures or the values results for those measures displayed by using a switch for on the one hand for the invoices, and then on the other hand for the orders. That is basically the reason behind it, why we started building our measure tree. That was our use case. So let's have a look at the tree and how we write our measures and structure our model in order to do so. So as the basis, you could say the roots of a tree, we create a calculated table with one row for orders and one for invoices. So this table basically has two columns and two rows in this case, just one column including an ID and one column including the title for orders and invoices. So the user knows which table he is filtering at the moment. Then as the, you could say, stem of the tree, we have our general measures for the orders table for the sales amount and for the sales amount for the invoices. So those measures are basically our basis for the rest of the tree, and we can use them separately, of course, whenever the functionality of the switch isn't needed, but we also use them at the basis for the switch function. So at the next step, we would create a single measure for the sales amount for either orders or invoices. So we write a measure referencing the sales amount orders and the sales amount invoices in different variables, and then use a switch function. Depending on which filter is selected, the switch will display the correct amount for this correct sales amount for either orders or invoices. And which is what is displayed. Those results can basically be seen as the branches of the tree. So we can go in either direction of sales or of the orders or of the invoices. So we have branches in two different directions. And further on top of this, we can use the sales amount order or invoices measure to add filters on top of those, like different time spans. So for example, we would say we want the sales amount of last X days or the last Y days. So basically what we do is we create our fundamental measures and reuse them, adding to the structure further and further, which then finally results in our measure tree that you can see here. And now I want to show you what it would look like in detail and how we build it up. And I'm using a simplified example in which the user would be able to change between the sales quantity or the amount of products purchased by using a switch. So what we first did is that we created a calculated table using an ID column and the amount of products or the quantity as the filter condition. Then we created a measure, as I've just explained, with the variables inside it. and the switch function, looking at either amount of products or quantity purchased is being displayed. So we would have a matrix in our Power BI desktop with our customer, and we could want to switch between products and quantity. Now we can see the amount of products that were purchased, and I can easily switch to the quantity of products purchased by just clicking a single button and not having to change any view or anything. So I'm still on the same page, in the same visual, and can easily switch between those two measures. And this is, of course, a simplified example, and it's much more useful if you have two fact tables as we do. So then it makes a lot of more sense to use it. Our best practice number 8 is to check your dependencies every now and then. So Tabular Editor allows you to check dependencies of your measures. And it's a really useful feature to keep track of your structure and to use it for debugging. And you can also identify unused measures. So in Tabular Editor 2, you would simply select the measure and press F3. And in Tabular Editor 3, you would select your measure and press Shift and F12. So what does it look like? So let's say we want to see the dependencies of our measure that we've just created for our switch. So I would press Show Dependencies. I can now see that no other object depends on my measure. But if I want to see on what measures my new measure depends, I could see that, of course, on one hand, we have a dependency to the filter context. And then we depend on the sales, so the product amount of quantity and the amount of products purchased. So I can clearly see on which measures I depend, and then you can also see for those measures you have included in this measure, what columns are referenced there. So you can easily use it to debug your model if you have any mistakes or are unsure or get unrestricted results for your measure. You can easily see what measures are referenced and what values are referenced to start your debugging process. Another great feature is to use perspectives. So most of the time, you build your one large data model for different stakeholders. For example, you have power users who build a report for the sales team, for example, and then you have another power user who builds a report for your CEO. So while the sales team only should see relevant sales data for them, the CEO, of course, needs to see all the business data. So therefore, you can use the perspectives to only include relevant data for the specific use case. And by doing so, you simplify the creation of reports for all your power users, since they only see the measures they really need for their report and do not see your whole large data model. So how do perspectives work? In Tabular Editor, you would see at the top the perspective folder and can create a new perspective. So for example, we would create one for the sales team and then create another one that's, let's say, call it strategic, for our CEO, where every single business data or relevant data for the CEO is included. So if I want to add data or columns, tables, measures to the perspective now, I would select it, look at the properties. Right at the bottom, you can select show in perspective and would select true for the perspective you want to show it in. So let's say the large sales should only be shown in the strategic perspective. I would only select true in strategic and false for sales. And then, of course, because two measures are included in either perspective, the sales table would be included in both perspectives. And if I would say the product table should only be seen by the CEO, I would only include it in the strategic perspective. Then when selecting your data model, you can now see not only the model perspective, but also the sales and strategic. And it will also show you what columns or tables are included in your perspective. So if I would now select sales, I would see that I only can see the amount of customers. Then I also can switch back to my strategic perspective and would be able to see the whole product table and the amount of large sales. making it the field list much smaller and much more usable than before. And our last best practice is using the best practice analyzer. So as I've mentioned earlier, Power BI Tabular Editor introduces the best practice analyzer, which is a tool that lets you define global or model-specific rules using a simple expression language. So at any time, you can check whether objects in your model satisfy or violate the set of rules. For example, you can create rules to check if your naming conventions are kept, if metadata properties are set up correctly, if visible objects are exposed in perspectives, and so on. And what you can do is that you can either write your own set of rules, or you are able to download a preset of rules. So for example, if we define our 10 best practices, we could write them as a set of rules and put them into Tabular Editor to check if our 10 best practices that we've defined for us are always satisfied or violated. I will now show you how to load the rules into Tabular Editor and how to use the best practice analyzer. So at the beginning, you can go into the best practice analyzer tab and see the button on the left. When you press it, you open the pop-up where you can manage your best practice rules. So as you can see, there are no rules in the model just yet. So I could press add. Now I can select to create a new file, add a file for local file or from URL. I would now add a local file that I've downloaded before. So now you can see all the rules that were in the file. They are even grouped by different topics. And at the moment, they are all selected. So we have a large set of rules already in there. And you can select or deselect the rules you want to apply to your model by just ticking the box in front of them or unticking it. What you can also do is that you can edit your rules. So let's say you have a specific need, you don't want to say larger than 0 or something, you can put in the number you want. If you press OK, now the rules are active. So now I would say all the violations in my data model. For example, that my columns for a relationship don't have the same name, that I have not formatted the string yet for different measures. So I could click on the measure and now format my string. So set it to a whole number, for example, go back into the best practice analyzer, and the amount of customers would be now gone because this rule is not violated anymore for this specific measure. So I can look at all my violations, can see some unused measures. A good example for the best practice analyzer is the division. So you should use the divide and measure the formula divide instead of dividing by itself. So if I would write a measure dividing two measures by each other and save it back, I have instantly the rule violation here. So if I go back into my measure and use the divide function instead, so I put in the correct function with my measures, dividing everything by each other in the proper way, and save this back. Now the violation is gone because the rule is now satisfied. This is how simply the best practice analyzer works. And it helps you very much to follow your own best practice rules or follow a preset of rules to keep the structure on your model nice and clean, and helps you very much avoiding any mistakes. All right, here's a quick recap of our 10 best practices you have just seen in detail. And those best practices really support you to keep your data model clean, and even when working with different developers like we do. So as you now know how to keep your data model nice and clean, I will now hand back over to Steffen, who will show you why the aligned workflow is so important and what our specific workflow looks like. And this will also emphasize why the clean data model is so important. Thank you.
Okay, back again. Hello. Now I want to show you the last part of our session. It's how to work with several developers simultaneously on one data model. So, what is our goal? Our goals are clear communication with our stakeholders. We have one email address for all developers, and all requests end up there. So we have an overview of our workload all the times. We can work with several developers at the same time on one data model, independently of each other, which means that everyone can develop that ticket at their own pace. Yeah, and we can deploy our respective work results independently several times a day. And the last one is you can see what the code developer was doing. Yeah, okay, this point is very valuable for me as a team leader because I can always see what everyone has been working on. Yeah, and that's very cool. And there is also a certain history. So when we can answer questions like, but that wasn't there yesterday, we can always say it has been there for 2 weeks, yeah, because we know the exact date. And as I already said, we use Atlassian software. So a quick reminder, Jira is our ticket system, yeah, BITBUCKET as JIT repository, and SourceTree as our JIT client. So this point is just how to illustrate how we divide our work. Yeah? Each developer is assigned primary responsibility for one or more tools. And here are 3 developers. Of course, each developer can completely substitute, for example, in vacation or illness. Yeah? And if you are familiar with agile work methods, this should be very easy for you. We use Kanban boards for our workload. Every tool is a new epic. And as I already said, every dev is responsible for one tool. And normally we write the requirements as user stories. We use the language of the users to describe his personal problem. And we give every user story a business value and an acceptance criteria when his expectations has been met. Normally, several tasks or subtasks fulfill the requirements of the user stories. And my boss is watching right now. Sometimes we have bugs, yeah, but this is a separate card here on our Kanban board, yeah. And now to our data model. We have big data models that contains all columns and measures, yeah. It is deployed several times a day. But that is where you have to pay the most attention. If you overwrite your colleagues' work in the live model, every user in the Power BI tools will see it immediately because error messages will appear if a measure is missing. So it's even worse if a dev debugs something and you deploy the error, again by mistake, if it was still present on your local version. So please be careful on that. Yeah, it happens all the time. Okay, this is our basic scenario. We have our master model on the JIT repository. And from there, it is downloaded. It's called pull-in to the local drive for each dev. And everybody now has his copy of the master model and can work with it independently. And after that, the dev can push her or his work back again to the JIT repository at his own pace. That's the main construction. And how you set up a BITBUCKET repository, the best way is to follow this link. I can't show it to you in detail because it would take a lot of time. In the following, I would only describe the interaction between Tabular Editor and SourceTree, our Git client. So, and this is the most beautiful graphic of all, or isn't it? Yes, I would say so. So I'm about to show you with the help of some videos and how the individual steps look like, so you get a feeling for the whole workflow. Yeah. So here we go on the pull process, the first 3 steps. This is the pull process. Here you can see a source tree and how I press the pull button to get new things of our data model. Yeah. We have to wait a moment. And you can now see in the history, there is a new measure from Kathrin named small sales. And you can even see the measure with the calculate function here in the preview. In the next step, I open the data model in TE3 via open model from folder. So updating the workspace database, there we go. And we can now search for this specific measure, small sales. There it is. And that is a pull process. Yeah, I think it's very straight and clean. So back to our overview. We have now completed the first 3 steps and can now code and look at the results in the new pivot preview of the TE3. By the way, a very, very cool function. Or you can test your measure with a Power BI file that we have previously connected to our workspace with TE3. And after that, we have to bring our work results back to our master model. And the function for that is save to folder. So what happens if we use the save to folder function? I will show it in a few seconds. We split our BIM files into several JSON files. That's the first one. Namely, each measure, table, each column becomes a separate JSON file so that our source tree can more quickly recognize that this file has been modified. And this is really, really fast. Okay. Here you can now see the save to folder function in action. First, I write a measure text amount. Yeah. It's nothing special. It's just a sum function. Then I press the save to folder button to save it locally. And then I switch back to the Windows Explorer. And first you will see the data folders, relationship tables, and so on. Then I click on tables, on sales, and on columns. There you will see all columns and calculated columns. And in the next folder, there is our text amount measure. Yeah, and each file, as you can see, only 1 kilobyte in size, so very, very small. Okay. Here's our overview, and we have now saved our work results to our local drive. And now we have to push it back to the cloud. Yeah? And if no other dev was fast enough, you just have to push, and I will show you this now. Okay, the push process. Here we go. I saved the model with the save to folder function again. And switch to source tree. And there I can see my measure in the unstaged file. Then I press stage all. And after that, I have to give the commit a name, yeah, to push my results back to it. And the important thing is that it must be concise as possible because you can later find it in your history. So there. I press the push button. And after that, I can still look at my step in the history. So, and you can see what everyone was doing there. Okay, this is not a normal process. Normally, you first have to pull and then to push the whole thing. So I will show you this process now. For that, I create another measure, order quantity. Okay, it's nothing special again, it's just a sum. So, and as you can see, I will now save it back to my local folder. We have to wait a moment. So I can switch back to source tree. And there I press stage all again, but you can now see a 1 on the pull button, which means that another developer was quicker and we first have to pull it. So now you can commit your changes again. Yes. Okay, another name. Committed, and then we can push it back to our master model. Okay, so last thing we now have to do is, it's short and simple, is to deploy the whole thing. Yeah. And for that, first, check if everything is complete in T3 so that you don't overwrite your works collect. I already said it. And here we're checking it. Is there our quantity? Yeah. Is there Kathrin sales per customer? Okay. And after that, we can press the deploy button and we're finished with it. Yeah. So next, the key takeaways from our presentation. I hope you've seen that the Tabular Editor 3 is really, really cool. And I hope you have seen a lot of cool features. Yeah. And the next one is a data model is like an asset. Yeah, and needs a lot of love. So care for it like a diamond. I've worked with my old data model, I think, for 7 years or so. So a very long time. And the last one is if you work with 2 developers or more, yeah, an aligned workflow is so, so important. And the best thing for you is you now have the tools for that. Yeah. And that's the end of our presentations. And if you have questions, feel free to.
Yeah, thank you, Steffen and Kathrin. Yes. Wow, I'm blessed. What a great job you have done both together.
Okay, thank you, Evan.
Thank you.
I have some questions left. Are there features of the Tabular Editor version 3 that you would warn us from using? Are these features that can cause problems? So it's a beta, it's a preview. In what kind of things did you run into? What you said, okay, don't use this in production.
Okay. And Kathrin is using it in production. I'm not, because I had failures, and you have to be careful with that. Yeah, I already wrote with Daniel, it's the author of the Tabular Editor 3, but you have to be a little bit careful. So test it before you use it. That would be my hint.
Yeah, of course, it's a beta version right now, and there are still some issues. When I couldn't deploy my things, my deployment crashed our whole model, but then we still have the BIM file. And I just deployed it with the Tabular Editor 2 and there was no problem anymore. But of course, we hope that all those issues, of course, all those issues will be fixed once it's live. And except from that, we haven't seen anything that we didn't like. So we would highly recommend using it, I think.
Okay, and the next question is, what is the feature from Tabular Editor 3, what you missed in 2.4, I think it is? What is the best feature you have seen?
IntelliSense.
IntelliSense, definitely. Yeah. And I mean, also all the combinations, everything that I've shown you is really great, but IntelliSense is awesome. And I really love the DAX scripting function. Makes it so much faster to edit your measures in bulk or anything like that.
Yeah. And the pivot preview, that's really cool. And the working database. So you can connect your file now to a real database. And that's really cool because you can preview your data now and you don't have to switch back to Visual Studio. So that's really cool.
That's pretty cool because one of my consultants asked me, Erwin, how can I do that? I need data in Tabular to verify if my data is correct or not.
Now you can see it. It's cool. Now you can see it.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I have some more questions from Ben.
Okay.
Are there any drawbacks to installing Tabular 3 in an enterprise environment? Did you ever have an IT department have reservations as they have with some third-party tools? So if you are only a Microsoft-only company,
I don't know. The question is, do you want to work with Visual Studio? It's so buggy. It's so, no. You want to work with Tabular Editor 3. That would be my advice. Yeah. And if you have an IT department, knock at the door every day and say, I want to have the Tabular Editor 3. Because it's so much better.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's much more lightweighted and easy to integrate, and you don't need a license for Visual Studio, because if you use Visual Studio, of course, in your company, then you need an enterprise license.
Yeah.
And then another question, have you ever included the best practice analyzer in a DevOps pipeline?
No. Oh? No. We don't have.
I know that there are some blogs from Daniel around this, or a video. I will post it in the chat because I was watching the video this week, so I will put it in the chat. Then cool. Some more questions. Wondering if you ever use SQL Server data tools for the modeling.
Yeah. We have used it, but it's ugly. I think that was from Tom, this question.
Yeah.
No? Yeah, okay. I think Tom likes the tabular editor a lot. Yeah, it was an answer to the question before. Yeah.
Yeah.